The night was supposed to be peaceful. The city skyline sparkled with thousands of lights, and the rooftop of the high-rise seemed calm, almost romantic. Grace, 6 months pregnant, leaned against the railing, feeling the cool wind on her face. She believed her husband Ethan had finally decided to spend time with her after weeks of cold distance. He had said softly, "Let's go up to the rooftop. The stars will help you relax." For a woman who still desperately wanted to believe in her marriage, those words were enough to follow him. But deep inside, Grace carried an ache that never left. She remembered nights lying awake alone, Ethan coming home late, the faint smell of perfume clinging to his suit, the cold excuses about working late at the office. Her mother had warned her once, sometimes men aren't as loyal as they promise. Grace had dismissed it, thinking Ethan was different. She was wrong. Still, tonight she forced herself to smile. She held her belly with one hand as if protecting the life inside her and turned toward Ethan with hope flickering in her eyes. "It's beautiful up here," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing me." But Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on her, cold, calculating. Grace felt uneasy. Something about his silence pierced her heart. She stepped closer to him, searching his face. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded slightly, but his lips curled in a way she had never seen before. For the first time, Grace saw not her husband, not the man she thought she loved, but a stranger standing in front of her. Her heart skipped a beat. Ethan placed his hand gently on her shoulder. For a split second, it felt like tenderness, and Grace's hope flickered again. Maybe he did care. Maybe she was just overthinking. She leaned into his touch, whispering, "I'm glad we're together, Ethan. I know things have been difficult, but we can make it through. For the baby, for us." That was the last moment Grace felt safe, because in the very next breath, Ethan's grip tightened. His hand, once soft, became forceful. He leaned in, his voice colder than the night air. "There is no us anymore, Grace." Before she could process his words, before she could even gasp, Ethan shoved her with brutal strength. Her body lurched backward, the world spinning, the sound of the city below roaring in her ears. Grace screamed, clutching her belly, the weight of her unborn child pulling her downward. In that instant, her entire world shattered. Love turned into betrayal, trust into a death sentence. She had no time to think, no time to cry. The man she trusted with her life had just chosen to end it. The rooftop lights blurred as she fell, air slicing past her face, terror flooding every vein in her body. She tried to scream again, but the wind swallowed her voice. And just when it seemed like everything was over, when the ground rushed up and death opened its jaws, something impossible happened. A strong hand reached out of nowhere, gripping her wrist with unshakable force. Grace Carter was the kind of woman people described as gentle, almost too gentle for her own good. At 28, she had never chased luxury, never desired attention. She loved small things, her classroom of children, the smell of chalk on her hands, and the sound of little voices calling her Miss Carter. Teaching wasn't just a job, it was her heart. She believed shaping young minds was her calling, and she did it with every ounce of patience she had. Her life before Ethan had been modest. She grew up in a small apartment with her widowed mother, Mrs. Carter, who worked long hours as a seamstress to put food on the table. Grace learned sacrifice early. She often skipped outings with friends so she could stay home and help her mother with sewing. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was full of love. So when Ethan walked into her life, everything changed. He was tall, handsome, polished, everything she thought she could never deserve. He pursued her with flowers, dinners, and promises of a future she had only dreamed about. To Grace, he seemed like a miracle. Her friends warned her to be cautious. Men with money don't always treat women kindly, one said. But Grace ignored it. She wanted to believe love could be simple, pure, everlasting. Their wedding was small, but beautiful. Grace, in her lace dress, looked at Ethan with eyes full of trust. He vowed to cherish her in sickness and in health, words she clung to as if they were sacred. For a while it felt real. They laughed, cooked meals together, and planned for children. When Grace found out she was pregnant, she cried tears of joy, thinking this child would complete their happiness. But slowly, cracks appeared. Ethan's late nights became frequent. His touch grew colder. Grace brushed it off, convincing herself it was just work stress. "He's providing for us," she whispered to herself as she placed his dinner in the fridge, untouched again. Despite the doubts gnawing at her, Grace never stopped giving. She cooked his favorite meals, ironed his shirts, and left little notes in his briefcase that said things like, "We love you," with a tiny heart. She believed if she loved harder, things would get better. Her students noticed the change too. "Miss Carter, are you sad?" one little girl asked after class. Grace forced a smile, replying, "No, sweetheart, just tired." But deep down, she was exhausted. Not from teaching, but from carrying the weight of a marriage built on secrets she couldn't see yet. And yet she held on. She wanted her child to grow up with both parents, something she never had. She told herself that Ethan's distance was temporary, that soon he would come back to her with the warmth she once knew. She prayed every night, her hands resting on her growing belly, whispering, "Please God, let him still love me." But prayers alone couldn't stop what was already unfolding. While Grace was clinging to the dream of a family, Ethan was slipping further away into a world she wasn't allowed to see. And soon, that hidden world would destroy everything Grace thought she had. To outsiders, Grace and Ethan's marriage looked like a dream. They lived in a sleek apartment in one of the city's most modern high-rises. The glass windows stretched from floor to ceiling, showcasing a breathtaking view of downtown. When guests visited, they admired the spotless white kitchen, the expensive leather couches, and the designer paintings hanging on the walls. Ethan had built the perfect facade, a successful businessman with a beautiful wife expecting their first child. Grace played her role, smiling politely, serving tea, and answering questions about the baby. "We're so blessed," she would say, her hands instinctively resting on her stomach. She wanted to believe it. She wanted the life she presented to be true. But when the guests left and the doors closed, the silence in that apartment felt like a prison. Ethan rarely spoke to her anymore. He spent his evenings in his office, laptop open, phone buzzing with messages he never explained. Grace often sat alone at the dining table, her dinner going cold while she waited for him to join her. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. When she asked, his answers were sharp. "Don't start, Grace. I'm working. Do you think this lifestyle pays for itself?" She swallowed her words, reminding herself of the apartment, the car, the status. She told herself it was worth the loneliness. After all, hadn't she promised for better or worse? But the worse was slowly crushing her. She would lie awake at night, listening to the city hum below while Ethan showered after another late return. The faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers lingered in the air. Grace turned to the other side of the bed, hugging a pillow and whispering to her unborn child, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here." Her mother noticed the change too. On the phone, Mrs. Carter asked gently, "Are you happy, Grace?" She forced a laugh, answering, "Of course, Mom. Don't worry about me." But the truth was clear in her trembling voice. Grace clung to hope through small moments. A rare smile from Ethan, a hand on her back as they walked into a dinner party. She told herself those glimpses of tenderness meant he still cared, that maybe once the baby arrived, everything would be different. She wanted so badly to believe their marriage was real, not just a show for the outside world. Yet the apartment itself betrayed the truth. It was spotless, yes, but cold. No photos of their wedding hung on the walls, no baby items filled the nursery. Ethan insisted it wasn't time yet. "We'll prepare later," he said dismissively. Grace obeyed, hiding the tiny onesies she had secretly bought in the back of her closet. Every day, the contrast grew sharper, the glossy perfection outsiders envied and the aching emptiness Grace endured behind closed doors. She was trapped in an image of happiness that suffocated her, a house built on lies and silence. And soon, that silence would be shattered by something Grace could no longer ignore. Because the first undeniable proof of Ethan's betrayal was about to surface. At first, Ethan's distance felt like something Grace could manage. She told herself he was stressed, that every marriage had ups and downs. But soon, his coldness became too sharp to ignore. The man who once brought her flowers now barely looked at her. The man who once held her hand now pulled away as if her touch was a burden. One evening, Grace cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes, and fresh salad. She spent hours making sure everything was perfect, hoping it would bring back even a fraction of the warmth they once shared. When Ethan walked through the door, she greeted him with a hopeful smile. "Dinner's ready," she said softly. But Ethan didn't even glance at the table. He tossed his jacket on the couch, loosened his tie, and muttered, "I already ate." Grace's heart sank. "But, I thought." "Don't start, Grace," he snapped, cutting her off. "You don't understand how hard I work. Do you think money just falls from the sky?" His voice was sharp, his eyes cold. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I just wanted us to have dinner together," she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, poured himself a glass, and disappeared into his office, leaving Grace standing there with a table full of untouched food. It wasn't just the dinners. Ethan had grown impatient with everything she did. When she asked about baby names, he dismissed her with a shrug. "We'll decide later." When she tried to share ultrasound photos, he barely looked. "Yeah, that's great," he said, scrolling through his phone. The sparkle in his eyes, the one she fell in love with, was gone. Grace tried to hold on. She told herself it was just a phase, that men sometimes grew distant during pregnancy. But deep down, fear crept in. She remembered the perfume on his shirts, the late-night calls he refused to explain, the way his phone never left his side. One night, while folding laundry, she noticed lipstick on his collar. Not her shade. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. She wanted to believe it was nothing, that maybe it was just a smudge from a business dinner. But the thought clawed at her, whispering the truth she didn't want to hear. When Ethan came home, she finally gathered the courage to ask. "Ethan," she said carefully, "I found something on your shirt. Can you tell me?" His eyes narrowed. "Are you spying on me now? Going through my things?" "No," Grace stammered. "I was just doing laundry. I need to know if—" Ethan slammed his glass on the counter, the sound making her flinch. "Enough, Grace. Stop acting paranoid. You're pregnant, hormonal, and imagining things. Get a grip." His words cut deeper than any knife. Grace bit her lip, tears burning in her eyes. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her body trembled with fear. And then, just as she thought he would storm off, Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. Grace glanced at the screen and froze, because the name flashing across it wasn't a business partner. It was Vanessa. Grace stared at the phone screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The name glowed clear as day, Vanessa. It wasn't a family member. It wasn't a colleague she had ever heard of. The tone of the message preview chilled her. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Miss you already." Her world tilted. She clutched her belly instinctively, as if protecting the child inside her from the cruel truth she had just discovered. Ethan snatched the phone from the counter before she could say a word. His jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with fury. "Don't you dare look at my phone," he hissed. Grace's voice trembled. "Ethan, who is Vanessa?" "She's no one. A client," he barked. "Don't make something out of nothing." But Grace knew better. She had been blind, maybe even naive, but she wasn't stupid. That message wasn't from a client. It was from a woman who knew Ethan in ways Grace no longer did. The next day, Grace decided she needed answers. She followed her instincts, something she had avoided for too long. After school hours, she stopped by Ethan's office unannounced. Her hands shook as she walked through the glass doors of the tall building, her belly making each step heavier. She told herself it was just to surprise him, maybe catch a glimpse of the truth. When she reached his floor, her worst fears unfolded before her eyes. Through the glass walls of his office, she saw Ethan laughing, really laughing, in a way he hadn't in months. And next to him, perched comfortably on the edge of his desk, was Vanessa. Young, stylish, and beautiful. Her hand brushed Ethan's arm as she leaned close, whispering something that made him smirk. Grace froze. Her heart cracked into 1,000 pieces. She wanted to scream, to burst into the office and demand answers, but her legs wouldn't move. She stood there, invisible, watching the life she thought she had unravel in front of her. When Ethan finally noticed her standing there, his expression changed instantly. He shot up from his chair, his smile vanishing, his face turning pale. "Grace," he said, forcing a laugh. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa's eyes flickered with amusement, a smirk tugging at her lips as she sized up Grace's pregnant figure. She didn't even bother to hide it. "Oh, this must be your wife," she said sweetly, but her tone dripped with mockery. Grace's throat tightened. I just wanted to see you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan rushed to her side, gripping her arm firmly, almost too firmly. "You shouldn't be here, let's go." But Grace couldn't unsee it. The way Vanessa looked at him, the way Ethan's body leaned away from his wife and toward another woman. The picture was crystal clear now. As Ethan pulled her out of the office, Grace glanced back one last time. Vanessa was still standing there, her smirk wider now, her eyes filled with triumph. It was the look of someone who had already won. That night, Grace cried silently into her pillow, her tears soaking the sheets as she whispered to her unborn child, "I'm so sorry. Mommy didn't want this for us." But deep down, she knew the truth. Vanessa wasn't going to stop until she had everything Grace once believed was hers. The days that followed felt like slow torture for Grace. Every morning, she woke up in the same luxury apartment, surrounded by glass walls and expensive furniture, yet she felt like she was living inside a cage made of ice. Ethan still played the role of the successful husband in public, but at home, he had become a stranger. He no longer asked about her health, no longer touched her belly, no longer spoke about the future they had once dreamed of together. Grace carried her pain quietly. She never told her mother, afraid that the truth would break her heart. Mrs. Carter often called, her frail voice filled with worry. "Are you eating well? Is Ethan taking care of you?" Grace always answered with the same lie. "Yes, Mom, he's wonderful." She forced cheer into her voice, even though the silence in her apartment told a different story. At school, her students noticed the sadness she tried so hard to hide. One little boy tugged at her sleeve after class. "Miss Carter, why are you crying?" She quickly wiped her face, kneeling down to meet his eyes. "I'm not crying, sweetheart. I'm just tired." But the truth was, every night when she returned home, the tears flowed freely. Grace spent hours alone, curled on the couch with a blanket, one hand on her belly as if shielding her unborn child from the storm outside. She whispered promises to the baby, words meant as much for herself as for the life she carried. "I'll protect you. I'll be strong for you. Even if Daddy doesn't love us, Mommy always will." Her body ached under the weight of pregnancy, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. She wanted so desperately to believe that Ethan would change, that he would wake up one morning and remember the vows he made. But every cold glance, every night he didn't come home, made hope harder to hold. Sometimes she tried to confront him. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said one evening, her voice shaking, but he dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Not now, Grace. I'm busy." He left the apartment minutes later, the door slamming behind him, leaving her alone once more. Grace began to fear the future. How could she raise a child in such emptiness? Would her baby grow up sensing the loneliness in her heart? She pressed her palms together in prayer at night, begging for strength. "God, please don't let me break. My child needs me. Please give me a reason to hold on." But even as she prayed, a dark thought lingered. What if Ethan wasn't just unfaithful? What if he was planning something worse? One evening, as Grace cleaned up the kitchen, she overheard Ethan on the phone in the next room. His voice was low, but she caught fragments. "She's too naive. Won't see it coming. After the baby." Grace froze, her blood running cold. Because in that moment, she realized Ethan wasn't just betraying her. He was plotting against her. The morning after overhearing Ethan's chilling phone call, Grace's entire body trembled with unease. She couldn't stop replaying his words in her head. "She's too naive. After the baby." Each syllable felt like poison. Her instincts screamed that Ethan was planning something sinister. Yet when he walked into the kitchen that morning, wearing his crisp suit and practiced smile, he looked like the charming husband everyone believed him to be. "Good morning," Ethan said smoothly, placing a kiss on her forehead as though nothing was wrong. Grace flinched at his touch, but forced a smile. Her heart pounded against her ribs, torn between wanting to confront him and fearing the consequences. To her surprise, Ethan sat at the table while she poured his coffee, something he hadn't done in weeks. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone unusually soft. "I know I haven't been around much. Work's been overwhelming, but I don't want you to think I don't care." Grace blinked, stunned. Was this real? Was he finally admitting his neglect? "I want us to start fresh," he continued, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You and me. Especially with the baby coming. We need to focus on our family." Tears stung Grace's eyes. For a moment, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man she had married still existed under all the lies and cruelty. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Ethan, I've missed you." He squeezed her hand, his gaze warm but calculated. "I've missed you too. I promise, Grace, things will get better. I'll take care of you. You won't have to worry about a thing." It sounded perfect, almost too perfect. That night, Ethan came home early with flowers, her favorite lilies. He cooked dinner, poured her sparkling water into a wine glass so she wouldn't feel left out, and even rubbed her aching feet while they watched television. Grace felt her walls begin to crumble. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe the phone call was about business. Maybe Vanessa was just a meaningless distraction. But beneath the sweetness, Ethan's eyes carried a shadow Grace couldn't ignore. Every smile seemed rehearsed, every gesture slightly off. Still, her desperate heart clung to the illusion. She wanted to protect her baby from a broken home. She wanted to believe her husband hadn't turned into a monster. Over the next few days, Ethan played the role of doting husband flawlessly. He accompanied Grace to a prenatal appointment, holding her hand as the doctor checked the baby's heartbeat. "Strong and healthy," the doctor said with a smile. Grace's heart swelled, and when Ethan kissed her cheek afterward, she almost convinced herself it was real. But reality came crashing back the following weekend. While Ethan was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Grace told herself not to look, but temptation won. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The message glowed on the screen. She bought every word. "Can't wait until it's just us. Soon, my love." It was from Vanessa. Grace's stomach turned, bile rising in her throat. The sweet husband act was nothing more than a mask. Ethan hadn't changed. He was pretending, waiting for the right moment, and Grace now knew she was living with a man who was planning her downfall. The message from Vanessa echoed in Grace's mind like a haunting drumbeat. She bought every word. "Can't wait until it's just us. Soon, my love, soon." Those lines confirmed her darkest fear. Ethan's kindness had been nothing more than a performance. The man she once trusted was not only betraying her, but preparing to erase her from his life completely. Grace felt sick, yet she knew she had to stay calm. She slid the phone back onto the nightstand before Ethan stepped out of the shower. When he emerged, towel around his waist, flashing his charming smile, she forced herself to smile back. Inside, her stomach churned with dread. She couldn't let him know she had seen the message. But Ethan and Vanessa were no longer hiding their intentions, not from each other. Late one night, Ethan met Vanessa in a dimly lit parking garage where shadows covered their secret. He leaned against his car, his voice low but firm. "She trusts me again, completely. That makes it easier." Vanessa smirked, brushing her fingers across his chest. "Good. I'm tired of waiting. I want us to be free. No wife, no baby, just you and me." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Soon. I already have a plan. I'll take her somewhere quiet, somewhere no one will suspect. When it happens, it'll look like an accident." Vanessa leaned in closer, her lips brushing his ear. "And when it's done, everything will be ours." They sealed the pact with a kiss, their shadows merging under the dim light. Meanwhile, Grace sat alone at home, sensing danger creeping closer. She didn't know the details, but her instincts screamed at her. Ethan was planning something final. Every glance he gave her, every tender word, felt like the calm before a storm. She couldn't sleep. She paced the apartment, clutching her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "Mommy will protect you. Somehow, I'll find a way." But Ethan was meticulous. He began asking Grace to join him on evening walks, something he hadn't suggested in months. "Fresh air will be good for you and the baby," he said with an easy smile. Grace nodded, though her nerves burned with suspicion. One evening, he proposed something different. "How about we go to the rooftop tomorrow night? You love the view. It'll be special. Just us." The words chilled her. The rooftop. The same place where she had once leaned against the railing, innocent and trusting. She saw something flicker in his eyes when he said it, a hint of cold calculation. Grace forced a smile, nodding slowly. "That sounds nice." But inside she was shaking. She knew that rooftop invitation was no innocent gesture. It was a setup. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She knew she couldn't confront him directly. He was too dangerous now. She would have to play along, pretend she was still the naive wife who trusted every word. Only then would she have a chance to survive. The next evening arrived faster than she expected. Ethan was unusually attentive, his arm draped around her as they stepped into the elevator. Grace's heart pounded louder with every floor they ascended. When the doors opened to the rooftop, the cool night air hit her face. Ethan smiled, guiding her toward the edge, and Grace realized she was walking straight into the trap he had been building all along. The rooftop glistened under the city's neon glow, a place that might have been romantic under different circumstances. For Grace, it felt like the edge of a grave. The cool night breeze carried the faint hum of traffic below, a reminder of how high they truly were. Ethan's hand rested lightly on her back, but it didn't feel like affection. It felt like a warning. "You see?" Ethan said smoothly, his voice almost too calm. "Isn't this view beautiful? Just you, me, and the stars." Grace forced herself to nod, clutching her belly as if the unborn child inside her could shield her from the danger standing beside her. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. Not here. Not when Ethan would notice any sudden move. She tried to sound casual. "Yes, it's beautiful." Her voice cracked, betraying her fear. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes reflecting the city lights but holding none of their warmth. "You know, Grace, life is all about timing. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to make room for the future." The words sent a shiver racing down her spine. "What do you mean?" she whispered. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of love. It was the smile of a predator who knew his prey was cornered. "Don't worry about it," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face with chilling tenderness. "You'll understand soon." Grace's stomach twisted. She had seen this man laugh, hold her hand, promise her forever. Now, standing on this rooftop, she realized those memories were nothing but lies. The man beside her wasn't her husband anymore. He was her executioner. Ethan guided her toward the railing, his arm tightening slightly around her waist. "Lean against it," he suggested. "It'll feel good, the fresh air." Grace's knees wobbled. She glanced down at the dizzying view below. The cars no larger than toys, the people nothing more than moving specks. Her chest tightened, panic clawing at her throat. "Ethan, I don't feel safe here," she admitted, her voice breaking. He chuckled darkly. "Safe? Don't you trust me?" Her lips trembled, but she forced out, "Of course. I trust you." She had no choice but to play along. Ethan's hand slid from her waist to her back, pressing ever so slightly. Grace's breath caught. The railing dug into her lower back. One push, that's all it would take. Her unborn child kicked inside her, as if sensing the danger. Tears welled in her eyes. "Ethan, please," she whispered desperately. "Think of the baby." For a moment, his expression faltered, but then his jaw tightened, his eyes hard as steel. "This is for the best," he muttered under his breath. Grace's vision blurred with tears as Ethan's hand pressed harder against her back. She dug her nails into the railing, clinging to it with every ounce of strength she had. And then, with terrifying suddenness, Ethan shoved. Grace's body lurched forward, the world spinning into chaos as she felt herself falling into the void. The moment Ethan's hands shoved her forward, Grace's scream ripped through the night air. Her body pitched over the edge, the city lights blurring into streaks of color as the wind tore past her ears. She clutched her stomach instinctively, the only thought in her mind the fragile life inside her. "My baby," she cried, though the words were lost in the rush of air. Time slowed. Every memory of Ethan flashed before her. His smile when they first met, the promises on their wedding day, the way he once held her, as if she was the center of his world. But now those moments twisted into daggers. The man who had sworn to protect her had chosen to end her life instead. Her heart pounded wildly, terror flooding her veins. She saw the ground racing toward her, cars and streetlights rising up like an approaching tidal wave. Panic gave way to despair. This was it. She would never hold her baby. She would never see another sunrise. Ethan had stolen everything from her. And then, out of nowhere, something impossible happened. A strong hand clamped around her wrist, jerking her body violently. Grace gasped, the sudden stop nearly wrenching her arm from its socket. She looked up through tears and shock to see not Ethan, but another man leaning over the rooftop's edge, muscles straining as he held her weight. "Hold on!" the man shouted, his voice deep and commanding. Grace's mind spun in disbelief. Who was he? Why was he here? She clung to his hand with every ounce of strength left in her trembling body. "Please don't let go," she cried, her voice breaking. "I won't," he said firmly, locking eyes with her. His grip was steady, powerful, unshakable. In that instant, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safety. Above them, Ethan froze, his face draining of color. He hadn't expected anyone to be there. He hadn't planned for witnesses. His eyes darted between Grace, dangling from the rooftop, and the stranger who had appeared like fate itself. The man tightened his grip and began pulling Grace upward. Inch by inch, her body rose, her legs kicking desperately as she fought against gravity. The city roared below, but all that mattered was the strength in that stranger's hand, refusing to let her fall. Finally, with a final heave, he pulled her over the ledge and onto solid ground. Grace collapsed against the concrete, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wrapped her arms protectively around her belly, sobbing, "Thank you, thank you." The man crouched beside her, his sharp suit and commanding presence revealing he was no ordinary passerby. His eyes softened as he looked at her. "You're safe now," he said. "I won't let anything happen to you." Grace stared at him through blurred vision. He was tall, with dark hair and a confidence that radiated strength. She didn't know his name yet, but destiny had just written him into her life. Behind them, Ethan's mask of calm shattered. His secret was exposed, his plan ruined. Rage twisted his face as he hissed under his breath. Because now Ethan realized someone powerful had just entered the game, and his deadly secret would no longer stay hidden. Grace's body trembled uncontrollably as she sat on the rooftop floor, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. Her hands clutched her belly, desperate to feel the faint kick of life inside her. She whispered a prayer, barely audible. "Please be okay, baby. Please." Beside her, the stranger who had saved her knelt down, his sharp suit slightly wrinkled from the struggle. His presence radiated authority and calm, but his eyes carried fire. He extended a hand, his voice firm but gentle. "You're safe now. I've got you." Grace looked up, still shaking, and finally found her voice. Who are you?" The man's jaw tightened as he glanced at Ethan, who was frozen several feet away, his face pale. "Alexander Knight," the stranger said finally, "and I don't tolerate men who harm women." The name struck a chord. Grace had heard it before. Alexander Knight, the billionaire investor, a man whose influence stretched across the city like an empire. He wasn't just powerful, he was untouchable. Ethan quickly regained his composure, forcing a smile as though nothing had happened. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his tone oily. "Grace tripped. I tried to catch her." "You saw it wrong." Alexander's piercing eyes narrowed. "Do you take me for a fool?" His voice sliced through the night like a blade. "I saw you push her." Grace's heart pounded. She glanced at Ethan, who glared at her with thinly veiled rage, then back at Alexander. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Someone believed her. Someone had seen the truth. Ethan stepped forward, adjusting his suit as if appearances could save him. "Mr. Knight," he said smoothly, "I respect you, but this is private family business. I suggest you stay out of it." Alexander rose to his full height, towering with quiet menace. "A man who tries to kill his pregnant wife has no family business worth respecting." Grace's tears spilled over at those words. No one had defended her like this, not once. Ethan's charm had fooled everyone else, but not Alexander. Ethan's mask slipped, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with fury. "Be careful, Knight. You don't know what you're getting into." But Alexander didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to Grace and held out his hand. "You're coming with me. You're not safe here." Grace hesitated, fear gripping her. If she left with Alexander, Ethan's wrath would be unimaginable. But if she stayed, she knew she might not live to see another sunrise. Her trembling hand reached out, slowly curling into Alexander's. His grip was strong, steady, protective. For the first time in months, Grace felt like she wasn't alone. Ethan's voice thundered behind them. "Grace, don't you dare walk away from me." She turned her head, tears streaming, but her voice carried strength she didn't know she had. "You already threw me away, Ethan." Alexander guided her toward the rooftop exit, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. The tension crackled like lightning, the air thick with unspoken war. As the door closed behind them, Ethan's fist slammed into the railing, his scream echoing across the city. Because in that moment, he knew Grace had found an ally powerful enough to destroy him. Grace's body still shook as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her away from Ethan's furious gaze. She clung to Alexander's arm as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her legs felt weak, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might give out. The image of Ethan's hands pushing her replayed over and over, each memory stabbing her chest with betrayal. By the time they reached the ground floor, tears blurred her vision. Alexander guided her gently outside, his hand firm against her back. A black car pulled up immediately, sleek and intimidating. A driver stepped out and opened the door without a word. "Come with me," Alexander said firmly. His tone wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, one that strangely comforted her. Grace hesitated, looking back at the building, terrified Ethan would come storming out at any moment. Alexander read her fear and added, "He won't touch you again. Not while I'm here." Grace slid into the car, clutching her belly protectively. As the vehicle pulled away, the weight of everything hit her at once. Her body folded in on itself as sobs tore from her throat. He tried to kill me," she gasped, her voice breaking. "The father of my child, he tried to kill us both." Alexander's jaw clenched, his hands tightening into fists. For a moment, the billionaire mask slipped, revealing not a businessman, but a man enraged at injustice. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go through this alone anymore." But Grace felt broken. Her tears streamed endlessly, soaking her trembling hands. "I gave him everything," she whispered. "I trusted him. I loved him. And he threw me away like I was nothing." Her words cracked Alexander's heart in a way he hadn't expected. He had built his empire on logic, on control, on never letting emotions rule him. Yet seeing Grace crumble beside him, so fragile and yet so brave, stirred something deep inside him. Something protective, something human. The car stopped at the gates of a sprawling estate, the kind of mansion most people only saw in magazines. As the gates opened, Grace's eyes widened through her tears. "Where are we?" she asked softly. "My home," Alexander said simply. "You'll be safe here. No one gets past my security without my permission." Grace's voice trembled. "I don't belong in a place like this." Alexander turned to her, his eyes steady. "You belong somewhere you're respected, somewhere you and your child are safe. That's all that matters now." Inside the mansion, Grace was led to a quiet guest suite overlooking a garden. It was beautiful, but she barely noticed. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the floor, her hand never leaving her belly. Alexander lingered by the doorway, watching her with quiet resolve. He knew she was shattered, broken in ways only betrayal could cause. But he also knew one thing. Ethan had underestimated her. And Alexander would make sure Grace had the chance to rise again. Because what Ethan didn't realize was that the woman he tried to destroy had just gained a protector powerful enough to bring him to his knees. The first night in Alexander Knight's mansion was the first time in weeks Grace slept without fear of Ethan walking through the door. The bed was soft, the air calm, and the silence comforting instead of suffocating. But when she woke at dawn, her body still trembled from the memory of the rooftop, and her hand immediately moved to her belly. The baby kicked faintly, and she whispered in relief, "We made it. Somehow, we made it." A knock at the door startled her. When it opened, Alexander stepped in, his sharp suit already in place, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. "Good morning," he said, his tone softer than the night before. "How are you feeling?" Grace lowered her eyes, ashamed of her weakness. "Like my whole world collapsed," she admitted. Alexander walked closer, his gaze steady. "Your world didn't collapse, Grace. It was exposed. You saw the truth, and now you get to rebuild it." She blinked, his words sinking deep. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Ethan had only ever made her feel smaller. Alexander, somehow, made her feel like she wasn't invisible. Later that morning, Alexander introduced her to a private doctor he had called overnight. "She's under my protection," Alexander told him firmly. "Do whatever it takes to make sure both mother and child are safe." Grace lay nervously on the exam bed as the doctor checked her vitals and the baby's heartbeat. The steady thump of life filled the room, strong and reassuring. Grace broke into tears, covering her face with her hands. Thank God the baby's okay." The doctor gave her a gentle smile. "Your child is resilient, just like you. With rest and care, you'll both be fine." When the doctor left, Grace turned to Alexander, her eyes red but filled with gratitude. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked, her voice cracking. Alexander didn't hesitate. "Because no one deserves what he did to you, and because I have the power to make sure he never does it again." For the first time, Grace felt a flicker of safety, a spark of hope that maybe her story wasn't over yet. She clutched Alexander's hand, whispering, "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't owe me anything," he replied, his voice steady. "Just promise me one thing. Don't give up. Not on yourself, not on your child." His words struck her heart like a lifeline. Grace nodded, swallowing her tears. "I won't. Not anymore." But outside the mansion gates, Ethan's fury was boiling. He had searched for Grace all night, his pride shredded by the knowledge she had slipped from his grasp. When he learned she was under Alexander Knight's protection, his rage deepened into something darker. "Knight thinks he can steal my wife, my life?" Ethan growled, slamming his fist on his desk. Vanessa smirked beside him, but even she looked unsettled by the fire in his eyes. Because Ethan wasn't planning to let Grace go, not without a fight that could turn deadly. Grace spent her days in Alexander's mansion, wrapped in a fragile sense of safety. The guards stationed at the gates, the cameras lining the hallways, the quiet confidence in Alexander's voice. It all gave her breathing room she hadn't felt in months. Yet inside, her heart still carried the poison of betrayal. She needed to know the full truth. She needed to see with her own eyes what Ethan and Vanessa had done behind her back. One afternoon, while Alexander was in a meeting, Grace found herself wandering through his private library. The room smelled of leather and oak, filled with shelves stacked high with books and files. On the desk lay a folder marked with her name. At first, she hesitated. But curiosity and desperation won. She opened it. Inside were photos, documents, and reports Alexander's investigators had gathered overnight. Grace's breath caught in her throat. The first picture showed Ethan and Vanessa in a restaurant, their hands intertwined across the table. Ethan smiled, the same one he used to give her. Another photo showed them leaving a hotel together late at night. Her stomach turned as she flipped through more evidence, each page cutting deeper into her already broken heart. But it wasn't just infidelity. There were bank statements, transfers Ethan had made into an account under Vanessa's name. There were emails, cold and calculated. "Once she's gone, everything will be ours. No one will question it. She's weak, naive, perfect for this." Grace dropped the papers, her body shaking. They planned it all," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. The rooftop hadn't been a sudden act of rage. It had been premeditated, planned down to the last detail. At that moment, Alexander entered the library. His sharp eyes softened when he saw the folder scattered across the desk, and Grace standing there, trembling. "You weren't supposed to see it yet," he said gently. Grace turned to him, her voice breaking. "So it's true? He never loved me. He wanted me gone from the beginning?" Alexander walked closer, his tone firm but careful. "He loved you once, but greed rots men like Ethan. He saw you as an obstacle instead of a partner. And Vanessa, she fed that hunger until it consumed him." Grace collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "I gave him everything, and he wanted me dead." "To her." Alexander crouched in front of her, his voice steady. "Listen to me. What they planned for you doesn't define you. It defines them. You survived because you're stronger than they ever imagined, and now with proof like this, we can make sure they pay." Grace lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes searching his. "Proof? You mean we can expose them?" Alexander nodded. "Yes, but it won't be easy. Men like Ethan fight dirty. He won't surrender quietly. That's why you need to decide. Are you ready to fight back?" Her heart pounded. For the first time, she felt a spark of rage, a fire rising from the ashes of her heartbreak. She thought of her baby, of the life Ethan had tried to steal, and clenched her fists. Grace wiped her tears, her voice trembling but determined. "Yes, I'll fight. I won't let him win." Alexander's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Good, then we begin now." But neither of them realized that Ethan already suspected Grace had found an ally, and he was preparing his next move. The decision to fight back was the hardest Grace had ever made. For years she had been taught to endure, to forgive, to keep the peace. She had lived as the quiet wife, the devoted teacher, the woman who believed in sacrifice. But now, with her unborn child's life tied to her own survival, endurance was no longer enough. She needed strength. That night, Grace sat in the quiet of her guest room, staring at the folder Alexander had shown her. Photos of Ethan and Vanessa laughing, touching, conspiring. Bank statements filled with betrayal. Every page was another knife in her chest, but also fuel for her resolve. "He tried to erase me," she whispered to herself, "but I'm still here, and I won't let him win." Alexander found her hours later, still hunched over the evidence. He placed a cup of tea on the table beside her. "You don't have to drown in it, Grace. You've seen the truth. Now it's time to use it." Grace looked up at him, her eyes swollen from crying, but shining with a new fire. "I want to fight, but I don't know how. I've never been strong like you." Alexander's gaze softened. "Strength isn't about power or wealth. It's about refusing to break, even when someone tries to shatter you. You already have that." Her throat tightened with emotion, but she nodded. "Then tell me what to do." The first step, Alexander explained, was to gather more evidence. What she had was powerful, but Ethan was cunning. He would claim the photos were manipulated, the transfers misunderstood. They needed witnesses. They needed allies. Grace thought carefully. There was one person she could trust, Mark, her old colleague from school. He had been her friend long before Ethan entered her life. If anyone could help her, it was him. The next day, Grace sat nervously in a quiet cafe tucked away in the city. She wore a scarf and sunglasses, terrified Ethan's men might be watching. When Mark walked in, his familiar warm smile nearly broke her. He hugged her gently, careful of her pregnancy. "Grace, I heard rumors, but I didn't know it was this bad. Are you okay?" Tears pricked her eyes. "No, Ethan tried to kill me, Mark, and he's planning more. I have proof, but I need help. I can't do this alone." Mark's expression hardened with shock and anger. "That monster. Tell me what you need. I'll stand with you." Relief washed over her. For the first time in a long time, Grace felt less alone. "I just need someone who believes me," she whispered. Mark reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "I do. Always." But as Grace walked back to the car Alexander had sent for her, a chill crawled up her spine. A man stood across the street, watching her too intently. His eyes followed her every move. When she met his gaze, he quickly turned away, pulling out his phone. Grace's heart sank, because she realized Ethan might already know she was no longer playing the obedient wife. Grace should have known Ethan wouldn't stay quiet for long. Days after meeting Mark in secret, she received an unexpected visitor. It was early evening, and she was sitting in the garden of Alexander's mansion, sipping tea as the sun dipped low. The air was calm, but her heart carried the heavy weight of everything she had discovered. The front gates buzzed. Moments later, a guard appeared, his tone cautious. "There's a woman here asking to see you. She says she's a friend." Grace frowned. She had few friends left. Most of them had drifted away during her marriage. "What's her name?" she asked. The guard hesitated. "Vanessa." The teacup slipped from Grace's hands, shattering against the stone path. Her chest tightened. Vanessa, the woman who had stolen Ethan, the woman who had stood in her place with a smirk of triumph. Now she dared to show her face? Against her better judgment, Grace told the guard to let her in. She needed to hear what this woman wanted. Vanessa walked into the garden with the same polished elegance she always carried. Her dress was flawless, her hair perfectly styled, her smile sweet, but Grace could see the venom hidden beneath. "Grace," Vanessa said warmly, as if they were old friends. "You look, well." Grace's stomach churned. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa sighed, sitting down across from her uninvited. "I didn't come to fight. I came to talk. I think you've misunderstood everything." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Misunderstood? I saw the messages. I saw the photos. You and Ethan planned to replace me." Vanessa tilted her head, her smile never fading. "Grace, Ethan loves you. He's just confused. He said you were fragile, that you couldn't handle his world. He only leaned on me for comfort. Don't you see? I'm not your enemy." The words dripped with poison disguised as honey. Grace clenched her fists beneath the table. "You expect me to believe that? After everything?" Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Listen carefully. You're pregnant. You're emotional. Maybe you're imagining more than what's really there. If you just let go of this fight, things will be easier, for everyone. Ethan doesn't want to hurt you. Not really." Grace's blood ran cold. The subtle threat was clear. Stop resisting or suffer worse. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She leaned back casually, sipping the tea a guard had reluctantly served her. You have a chance to step aside gracefully. Raise your child quietly, away from the spotlight. Ethan will take care of you financially. And I'll take care of him. Isn't that better than dragging this out?" Grace's tears burned hot, but her anger burned hotter. She looked Vanessa in the eye, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "You think I'll roll over and let you destroy my life? You think I'll let you raise my husband as yours while I disappear?" Vanessa's smile faltered for the first time, but only slightly. "I think you don't have a choice." Grace leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "I do, and you'll regret underestimating me." Vanessa stood, adjusting her dress with icy grace. "We'll see." As she walked back toward the gates, Alexander stepped out from the mansion, having overheard the last words. His eyes locked on Grace, filled with both concern and pride. Because Grace had just declared war, and there was no turning back now. After Vanessa's visit, Grace felt something ignite inside her. A fire she had never known before. For years, she had been timid, forgiving, almost invisible in her own marriage. But hearing Vanessa speak as if she were disposable awakened something fierce in her heart. She wasn't just a wife who had been betrayed. She was a mother, carrying a child who deserved safety, dignity, and love. The very next morning, Grace stood in front of the mirror in the guest suite of Alexander's mansion. She barely recognized the pale, trembling woman staring back. "No more," she whispered, touching her reflection. "I won't be weak anymore. I won't let them win." Alexander noticed the change almost immediately. Over breakfast, Grace looked at him with new determination. "Teach me," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Teach you what?" "How to stand up for myself. How to fight back. I can't be the same woman Ethan thought he could throw away. I need to be stronger. For my baby and for me." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Good, because the woman Ethan tried to destroy isn't the same woman sitting in front of me now." From that day forward, Alexander became more than her protector. He became her mentor. He introduced her to his world: strategy, power, and control. He taught her how to read people, how to keep her composure, even when emotions threatened to spill over. "Your silence can be louder than any scream," he told her. Grace soaked in every lesson. She practiced her posture, her tone, even the way she entered a room. She learned how to project strength without saying a word. Slowly, the fragile teacher who once cried alone at night began to disappear, replaced by a woman who knew her worth. One afternoon, Alexander arranged for a stylist to visit the mansion. Grace hesitated at first, feeling guilty for the luxury. But when she saw herself afterward, her hair sleek, her dress elegant, her presence radiant, tears filled her eyes. For the first time, she didn't look like a broken wife. She looked like a woman reborn. Standing before the mirror, Alexander's voice came from behind her. "That's the real you, Grace. Not the victim, the survivor." Her hand rested on her belly, her voice steady. "No, more than a survivor. I'm a mother who will protect my child with everything I have." But transformation wasn't only about appearances. Grace began working with Mark, gathering more evidence against Ethan and Vanessa. Each piece of proof gave her courage. Each step forward another reminder that she was no longer powerless. Still, Alexander warned her. "Ethan won't sit quietly. He's dangerous. The more you rise, the harder he'll try to pull you down." Grace met his gaze with newfound fire. "Then let him try. I'm not afraid anymore." Alexander's lips curved into a rare smile, a mixture of admiration and resolve. But deep inside, he knew what Grace didn't. Ethan was already plotting his counterattack. And the moment Grace stepped back into the world, Ethan would be waiting to strike. Grace's transformation did not go unnoticed. Ethan was used to a timid wife who bowed her head, swallowed her words, and cried behind closed doors. But now, when she finally agreed to meet him in public after weeks of silence, she carried herself differently. She wore a sleek dress Alexander had chosen for her, her posture straight, her chin lifted. Even pregnant, she radiated an elegance Ethan had never seen before. They met at a cafe downtown. Ethan arrived first, his jaw tight with impatience. When Grace walked in, conversations around them seemed to pause. She no longer looked like the fragile woman he had tried to erase. She looked untouchable. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Grace," he greeted, forcing a smile. "You look different." Grace sat down calmly, her hands folded on the table. "Do I?" Her voice was steady, her tone almost casual. Ethan leaned in, lowering his voice. Where have you been? Do you think you can just vanish and humiliate me like this? Grace met his glare without flinching. You nearly killed me, Ethan. And now you're worried about humiliation? His smile faltered. For a moment, his mask slipped, anger flashing in his eyes. But then he leaned back, chuckling softly. Always so dramatic. You tripped, Grace. You've convinced yourself of something that never happened. Grace tilted her head slightly, studying him. She remembered Alexander's words. Your silence can be louder than any scream. So she didn't argue. She let the weight of her gaze linger on him until he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ethan tapped his fingers on the table. You think you're clever, don't you? Dressing up, pretending you've changed. But I know you, Grace. You're weak. You won't survive without me. Inside, Grace's anger burned, but outwardly she smiled faintly. We'll see. What Ethan didn't know was that Mark sat at a table nearby, pretending to read a newspaper while recording every word. They had planned it carefully. Grace would provoke Ethan, draw out his arrogance, while Mark captured the proof. But Ethan wasn't a fool. His eyes flicked around the cafe, his instincts sharp. He noticed Mark glance up for a split second too long. His jaw tightened. Grace sensed the shift. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. You're playing a dangerous game. Do you really think your new friends can protect you forever? Grace's heart raced, but she held her composure. I don't need forever. I just need long enough for the truth to come out. Ethan's smile returned, slow and sinister. Truth is a slippery thing, and I've always been good at rewriting it. He stood abruptly, tossing money on the table. Enjoy your little performance, Grace. It won't last. As he walked out, Mark rushed over, phone in hand. We got some of it, he whispered urgently. Not a confession, but enough to show his temper. Grace nodded, her stomach twisting. She had stood her ground, but she saw something terrifying in Ethan's eyes. Something that told her he knew she was no longer his pawn. And a man like Ethan, when cornered, was capable of anything. The invitation arrived in a black envelope embossed with gold lettering. Alexander handed it to Grace across the breakfast table, his expression unreadable. A charity gala, he explained. Every influential person in the city will be there, including Ethan. Grace froze, the fork in her hand slipping slightly. Ethan? You mean he'll see me? Alexander nodded. And that's exactly why you should come. You've hidden long enough. It's time to show him and everyone else that you're no longer his victim. Grace's stomach twisted. The thought of standing in the same room as Ethan and Vanessa made her pulse race with dread. But Alexander's words echoed inside her. You're not invisible anymore. 2 nights later, Grace stood in front of a full-length mirror inside Alexander's mansion. The woman staring back at her was unrecognizable. She wore an emerald green gown that hugged her figure, her hair styled elegantly, her makeup flawless but not overdone. The baby bump beneath the silk fabric wasn't something she tried to hide. Alexander had insisted she embrace it. You're not weak because you're carrying life, he'd told her. You're stronger. When Grace entered the ballroom that evening, all eyes turned. Conversations faltered. Champagne glasses stilled. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Isn't that Ethan Carter's wife? I thought she disappeared. She looks radiant. At her side, Alexander exuded quiet power, his hand steady on her back. He guided her through the crowd with ease, his presence daring anyone to question why she was there. Ethan noticed her the moment she walked in. His jaw clenched, his hand tightening around Vanessa's arm. Vanessa's smug smile faltered when she saw Grace glowing with newfound strength, dressed like she belonged to a world beyond Ethan's reach. Grace locked eyes with Ethan from across the room. For a brief moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken fury. Ethan looked like a man who had lost control of the game he thought he had mastered. Vanessa leaned toward him, her voice dripping with venom. She's with Knight. That's why she's still standing. He's protecting her. Ethan forced a laugh, though his eyes burned. Then let's remind her who she's dealing with. He led Vanessa toward Grace, his polished smile firmly in place. Grace, he said smoothly when they approached. What a surprise. You look, well. Grace turned to face him fully, her voice calm but edged with steel. Better than when you last saw me. Ethan's smile twitched, but he quickly covered it. And Knight, he added, nodding to Alexander, always swooping in where he doesn't belong. Alexander's gaze was ice, Protecting a woman from her husband's hands is exactly where I belong." The tension between them drew the attention of nearby guests. Whispers grew louder. Cameras flashed. Grace could feel the room leaning in, hungry for drama. Vanessa stepped forward, her false sweetness on full display. "Grace, we should talk privately. This isn't the place for—" Grace cut her off, her voice sharp enough to silence the room. "The place doesn't matter anymore. The truth always finds its stage." Ethan's eyes darkened, his mask slipping for just a second. Because he knew Grace wasn't there to hide, she was there to expose him. The ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers, but the air had grown heavy. Guests whispered behind jeweled hands, sensing something dangerous building in the center of the room. Grace stood tall, her emerald gown glowing under the lights, her baby bump proudly visible. Ethan and Vanessa flanked her like predators circling prey, but tonight Grace wasn't the same fragile woman they once toyed with. She took a deep breath and lifted her chin. "Ethan Carter," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "tell me, how does it feel to try and kill your pregnant wife, only to watch her rise again?" Gasps erupted. Heads turned. The orchestra faltered mid-song. Ethan's smile stiffened, his voice low and urgent. "Grace, lower your voice. You're making a fool of yourself." But Grace didn't flinch. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folder. Her fingers shook, but her resolve didn't. "You think I'm afraid of embarrassment? I was afraid once, not anymore." She spread the papers across a nearby table. "Emails, bank transfers, photos of you and Vanessa plotting behind my back. Proof that my near accident wasn't an accident at all." The crowd surged forward, curiosity overtaking etiquette. A businessman leaned over the papers, reading aloud. "Once she's gone, everything will be ours?" "My God." Vanessa's face drained of color. "Those are fake." She snapped, her voice trembling. "She's lying." Grace turned on her, her eyes blazing. "Lying? Were you lying when you wrote to Ethan, 'She bought every word, soon, my love, soon'?" She pulled out her phone, pressing play on a recorded message. Ethan's voice filled the ballroom. "She trusts me again, completely. That makes it easier." Gasps echoed like thunder. Faces turned toward Ethan, disgust etched in their eyes. Ethan's mask cracked, fury twisting his features. "You don't understand," he shouted, his smooth tone gone. "She's weak. She's nothing without me." Alexander stepped forward, his voice booming. "Enough." He stood behind Grace, tall and unyielding, his presence silencing the chaos. "Everyone here has now seen who Ethan Carter really is, a man who betrays, conspires, and attempts murder. There's no hiding from this." Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled. The story of the night had been handed to them on a silver platter. Grace felt her knees weaken, but she stood her ground, one hand on her belly. Her voice shook but carried across the room. "You tried to erase me, Ethan. But all you've erased is your own mask. Now the world sees you for what you are." Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm desperately. "Say something. Fix this." But Ethan jerked free, his face red with rage. "You'll regret this, Grace," he spat, pointing at her with venom. "This isn't over." Alexander stepped in front of her, shielding her from his glare. "No, Ethan. It is over. You just don't realize it yet." Security began moving closer, sensing the escalation. The guests parted, some whispering, some filming with their phones, capturing every moment. Grace's chest heaved, her body trembling from the confrontation. For the first time, she felt the weight lifting, the chains snapping free. But deep down, she knew Ethan's rage wasn't finished. Because men like Ethan didn't go down quietly, they lashed out, and his most dangerous move was still to come. The gala erupted into chaos. Guests huddled in clusters, whispering in shock, their eyes darting between Ethan and Grace. Phones captured every second, the damning evidence, Ethan's furious outburst, Vanessa's panicked face. The story wasn't just gossip anymore. It was proof, undeniable and public. A security guard stepped forward, speaking into his earpiece. Moments later, 2 uniformed officers entered the ballroom. Their presence sent a ripple through the crowd. Ethan stiffened, his jaw clenched tight. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his voice low but sharp. "You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone? You think they'll believe you?" Grace stood tall, her hands resting on her belly, Alexander steady beside her. Her voice carried, calm but resolute. "They don't have to believe me, Ethan. They can believe your own words." The officers approached. "Mr. Carter," one said firmly, "we need you to come with us for questioning." The evidence presented tonight raises serious concerns. Ethan's face flushed crimson. This is absurd. She's my wife. She's pregnant, hormonal, unstable. She's making it all up. He turned to the crowd, desperate. You all know me. I'm a respected businessman. I would never. But no one looked convinced. Some turned away in disgust. Others openly shook their heads. The whispers grew louder. I can't believe it. He tried to kill her. What kind of man does that? Vanessa clutched Ethan's arm, her voice a hiss. Do something. Don't just stand there. But Ethan shoved her off roughly, his mask shattering completely. This is your fault, he snapped at her, his voice echoing across the stunned ballroom. You told me she'd be easy to get rid of. Gasps swept through the crowd. Vanessa's face drained of color. Ethan, stop! But it was too late. The words had already condemned them both. Alexander stepped forward, his voice like steel. You just admitted it, in front of every witness here. There's no escaping now. The officers closed in, their hands gripping Ethan's arms. He struggled, shouting, You can't do this to me. I built this city. I made everything you see. I won't be destroyed by her. His voice cracked with desperation, no longer the confident businessman, but a man unraveling before the world. Meanwhile, Vanessa tried to slip away through the crowd, but security caught her by the wrist. You're coming too, one guard said coldly. She fought, her polished mask gone, screaming, I didn't do anything. It was all him. But the crowd had seen enough. They watched as both Ethan and Vanessa were dragged toward the exit, their reputations collapsing in real time. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing the fall of two people who once believed themselves untouchable. Grace exhaled shakily, her body trembling. She leaned against Alexander, whispering, It's over. It has to be. Alexander's hand pressed against her shoulder, steadying her. This part is over, he said quietly. But men like Ethan don't accept defeat easily. He'll find a way to fight back. Grace's eyes widened with fear. She had seen the madness in Ethan's eyes, the rage that burned deeper than pride. Because even as he was dragged out in handcuffs, Ethan Carter swore under his breath that this wasn't the end. And Grace knew he meant it. The ballroom slowly settled after Ethan and Vanessa were dragged out, but the air was still heavy with tension. Guests whispered, reporters scribbled furiously, and cameras continued to flash, desperate to capture every angle of the scandal. But for Grace, the noise faded into nothing. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe. Her knees buckled under the weight of everything she had endured. Alexander caught her before she could fall, guiding her gently into a chair in the corner of the room. Easy, he murmured. It's over now. Grace pressed a trembling hand against her belly, tears streaming down her cheeks. The baby kicked softly, and she let out a broken laugh between sobs. We're safe, she whispered. We're finally safe. Her emotions poured out in a flood she could no longer contain. Months of fear, betrayal, and heartbreak burst free. She wept openly, her shoulders shaking, her cries raw and unfiltered. The crowd around her softened. Even strangers who had only moments ago been hungry for gossip now looked at her with empathy. Alexander crouched in front of her, his steady presence anchoring her storm. You don't have to hold it in anymore, he said quietly. Let it out. You survived something most people couldn't imagine. Grace clutched his hand, her tears wetting his skin. I loved him, she whispered, voice cracking. I gave him everything, and he tried to kill me. I don't understand how someone can be so cruel. Alexander's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained gentle. Because he never deserved you, Grace. Men like Ethan only know how to take. But you know how to love. That's your strength, not your weakness. Her sobs softened into quiet sniffles. She leaned into his steady hand, for once allowing herself to feel comfort instead of shame. I thought I'd never be free of him, she admitted. But tonight, it feels like I finally am. Alexander gave a small nod. You are. He can't hurt you anymore. Not with the evidence you revealed, not with the whole city watching. But even as the words left his mouth, Grace's chest tightened with unease. She remembered the look in Ethan's eyes as the officers dragged him out. It wasn't just anger, it was a promise. A vow of vengeance. Later that night, as Alexander's car carried her back to his mansion, Grace rested her head against the window. The city lights blurred through her tears. For the first time in months, she felt a fragile sense of freedom. But it was fragile indeed. She whispered to her unborn child, We'll start over, somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't touch us." Her voice was soft but determined. Alexander, seated beside her, heard the words and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'll make sure of it," he promised. But outside, far from the safety of the car, Ethan's influence still lingered. Even from behind bars, men like him had ways of reaching beyond steel and stone. And Grace didn't know that Ethan's first call from his cell would set into motion a plan more dangerous than before. The following morning, Grace stood at the doorstep of her childhood home, the small brick house that had once been her sanctuary. Her mother, Mrs. Carter, opened the door with surprise, her frail hands trembling when she saw her daughter standing there, radiant yet fragile, her belly round with life. "Grace," Mrs. Carter whispered, tears filling her eyes as she pulled her daughter into a trembling embrace. "I was so worried. I prayed every night for you." Grace clung to her mother, her tears flowing freely. "I'm home, Mom. I'm finally safe." They sat together at the worn kitchen table, the same one Grace had eaten at as a child. The smell of her mother's cooking, the faded curtains, the familiar ticking clock, it was a stark contrast to the cold perfection of Ethan's apartment. For the first time in months, Grace felt warmth that wasn't forced, love that wasn't conditional. Mrs. Carter studied her daughter's face, noticing the tired eyes and faint lines of pain. "You've been through hell," she said softly. "But you're stronger than you think." Grace nodded, her hand resting on her belly. "I have to be, for the baby." Later that day, Alexander visited quietly, dressed in his usual sharp suit, but with a softness in his expression reserved only for Grace. He brought groceries, medicine, and even fresh flowers for Mrs. Carter's table. "You shouldn't be worrying about anything right now," he told Grace firmly. "Focus on healing. Let me handle the rest." Grace looked at him with gratitude that words couldn't capture. Alexander had become more than a rescuer. He was her shield, her steady anchor in a world that had tried to swallow her whole. In the weeks that followed, Grace slowly began to rebuild her life. She spent mornings helping her mother in the garden, afternoons writing lesson plans for the day she could teach again, and evenings reading to her unborn child. Each kick reminded her of why she had to keep moving forward. Alexander remained a constant presence, though never overbearing. He visited often, sometimes with security updates, other times simply to sit with Grace and listen. She began to notice the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way his voice lowered when he spoke her name. A bond was forming, fragile yet undeniable. Still, nights brought shadows. Grace would lie awake, replaying Ethan's voice, his threats, his rage. She told herself he was gone, locked away where he couldn't reach her. But deep down she knew men like Ethan didn't disappear so easily. One evening, as she rocked gently in a chair by the window, Alexander entered quietly. "You're thinking about him again," he said softly. Grace sighed. "I can't help it. Even in my freedom, I feel his shadow." Alexander knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. "Then let me be the light that keeps it away." Grace's heart tightened, a warmth blooming inside her she hadn't felt in years. But before she could answer, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and froze. The message was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakable. "You think you're safe? I'm not done with you." Grace's healing had only just begun, but Ethan's darkness was reaching for her once more. The message from the unknown number shook Grace to her core. She sat frozen, the glow of the phone burning into her eyes as the words replayed in her head. "You think you're safe? I'm not done with you." For a moment, her breath caught, the old fear threatening to drag her back into the darkness. But then she looked at her mother peacefully knitting in the living room, and at her belly, where her child kicked softly. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered to herself, "No, he won't control me anymore." The next morning, Grace took her first bold step toward independence. With Alexander's support, she signed the lease for a small studio space downtown, a place she could turn into her own classroom. For years, she had dreamed of creating an after-school program for children who needed extra help, but Ethan had always dismissed the idea. "Pointless," he used to say. "We don't need the money, and you don't need the stress." Now, as she stood in the empty room with its scuffed floors and bright windows, Grace felt alive again. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "This is where our future begins." Alexander arrived later with a team of contractors. He watched as Grace explained her vision with newfound confidence. Shelves filled with books, colorful rugs, art supplies, and music in the background. His lips curved into a rare smile. "I've seen boardrooms filled with men who thought they ruled the world," he said. "But none of them spoke with as much conviction as you just did." Grace laughed softly, surprised by her own courage. "Maybe I just needed to remember who I was before Ethan tried to erase me." The weeks that followed were filled with transformation. Grace painted walls, chose furniture, and met with parents eager to enroll their children. Word spread quickly. Miss Carter was back. The woman who had once seemed broken now stood tall, glowing with purpose. Her mother visited often, proud tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were stronger than you believed," she told Grace. "Your child will grow up seeing a mother who never gave up." Alexander became more present too, though he kept a respectful distance. He attended the ribbon cutting of her new program, standing quietly in the crowd as Grace gave a short, trembling speech about second chances. When their eyes met afterward, something unspoken passed between them. A promise, fragile but real. For the first time in months, Grace allowed herself to dream. She envisioned mornings filled with children's laughter, evenings rocking her baby to sleep, and a future no longer chained to Ethan's cruelty. But even as she rebuilt, shadows lingered. Late one night, as she locked up the new classroom, she felt a prickle on the back of her neck. The street was quiet. Too quiet. She glanced around, heart pounding. Across the road, a figure stood partially hidden under a street lamp, watching her. When she called out, the figure slipped into the darkness. Grace clutched her belly, her chest tightening. She whispered to herself, "He's still out there." Because even as she stepped into her new beginning, Ethan's threat loomed closer than ever. The night of reckoning came when Grace least expected it. She was closing the doors of her new classroom, the faint hum of children's laughter still echoing in the walls. The future finally felt tangible, fragile yet real. But as she turned the key, a shadow emerged from the alley. It was Ethan. His suit was disheveled, his face gaunt, but his eyes burned with the same venom she had seen on the rooftop. "You thought you could ruin me," he spat, stepping closer. "You humiliated me in front of the world. But I'm still your husband, Grace. That baby is still mine." Grace's pulse thundered in her ears, but she didn't back away. She placed a protective hand on her belly and lifted her chin. "You lost the right to call yourself my husband the moment you tried to kill me. And you'll never touch my child." Ethan's face twisted, his hand reaching toward her. "You think night can protect you forever? You won't always be here. But me, I'll always find you." Before Grace could respond, headlights cut through the night. Alexander's car screeched to a halt, and within seconds he was there. Sharp, unflinching, flanked by 2 security guards. His voice thundered across the street. "Step away from her, Ethan. Right now." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Ah, the White Knight, you think you've won because you've stolen what's mine?" Alexander stepped forward, his presence commanding. "I didn't steal anything. You threw her away, and now she has a life you'll never be part of." The guards closed in, but Ethan lunged, his desperation boiling over. He grabbed Grace's arm, yanking her roughly. Grace cried out, stumbling, but before he could drag her closer, Alexander's fist connected with Ethan's jaw. The sound cracked through the air. Ethan fell hard to the pavement, clutching his face. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Alexander had called them before arriving, anticipating Ethan's move. As officers pulled Ethan to his feet, he screamed, "This isn't over. She's mine. She'll always be mine." Grace stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "No, Ethan. I was never yours to destroy, and tonight proves it. You've lost everything." The officers dragged him away, his shouts fading into the night. Grace collapsed against Alexander, her body trembling from the confrontation. Tears spilled freely, not just from fear, but from release. "It's really over this time," she whispered. Alexander held her close, his voice steady. "Yes, he can't hurt you anymore." Weeks later, Grace stood in her classroom surrounded by children's laughter, her mother smiling proudly in the back and Alexander at her side. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece, not as the fragile woman Ethan tried to erase, but as a survivor who found her strength. On a warm spring afternoon, Alexander surprised her with a quiet proposal in the garden of his estate. "Grace," he said softly, kneeling before her and the child in her arms, Let me protect you, not because you need it, but because I want to spend my life with you." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes." And so, the woman once betrayed on a rooftop walked into a new life, married to a man who cherished her, raising her child in love and safety, and proving that no betrayal could silence her forever. So, my dear friends, our story comes to an end. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something has touched your heart in a very real way. Grace's journey reminds us that betrayal doesn't define us. Our response to it does. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Grace found that strength, and so can you. No matter how broken life makes you feel, remember, you are never powerless, and healing is always possible. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need these words, and don't forget to subscribe. Together, we'll keep building a place where stories heal, inspire, and remind us that even in the darkest nights, we can rise again.